Hey guys, have you ever been the victim of overtime tax? Don't know what that means or never heard of it? Well, it's Young BizWiz. Let me talk to explain why overtime tax is a bad thing or why Trump is trying to get rid of it. Let me break it down for you into what overtime even is, why it gets taxed, and then what Trump is trying to do to make it more feasible. So the first thing that you need to know is what overtime is. And if you don't know what overtime is, let's just say America. And for example, you work 40 hours a week. 40 hours a week is considered full time. So any hours that you work above that for a job, it is considered overtime. And in overtime in America, you usually get paid 1.5 times more. 1.5 times more means, for example, if you make $100 an hour, making 1.5 times more during overtime would mean you make $150 an hour. So if you work a few more hours in overtime, you might get a few extra $100, right? For example, but that only applies to the overtime pay, not, your 40-hour week, just any hours you work after the 40. And so that's what we call overtime pay. And what overtime tax is, when you get paid more money, how it works is you get put in a tax bracket. So everyone is in a tax bracket if they work for money. For example, you have the upper class, high class, middle class, lower class, etc. Most people are middle class, but there's some people that are up in the higher tax brackets, and there's people in the lower tax brackets. And usually the more money you make, the higher you get put in the tax bracket. So what happens is, when you get paid overtime, you make more money, right? And I know that's an obvious concept, right? But the thing is, when you make more money, you end up getting put in a higher tax bracket. So for example, let's say your job pays you $40,000 a year. And let's say you get put in some lower middle tax bracket of like 18%. Well, with you working overtime, let's say you now make $51,000 a year, $50,000 a year. Let's just make it 50 even. You will be put in a new tax bracket, and let's say you get taxed 24% in the new tax bracket. Well, you just made $10,000 more, but you ended up paying 6% more tax on your money. So it kind of seems like a net loss with all the hours you put in overtime to make more money to kind of be cut out by tax. So what Trump is trying to do, he's trying to overwrite and try to make a new law to try to get rid of overtime tax.
I'm also announcing that as part of our additional tax cuts, we will end all taxes on overtime. You know what that means? Think of that. That gives people more of an incentive to work. And I went to some economists, great ones, and I said, what do you think? They said, it would be unbelievable. You'll get a whole new workforce. The people who work overtime are among the hardest working citizens in our country. And for too long, no one in Washington has been looking out for them. Those are the people. They really work. They're police officers, nurses, factory workers, construction workers, truck drivers.
So off of the video that I just played right now, I think that what Trump is trying to do is basically make it so that if you get put in a certain tax bracket, let's say you make $40,000 a year, and then you work overtime and you make $50,000 a year, and that puts you in a new tax bracket, what's going to end up happening with the new legislation or the new law that he's trying to make is that even if you make $50,000, because you are doing it in overtime hours, you'll actually be put in the $40,000 tax bracket and still get taxed the same as someone that makes $40,000 a year. And so personally for me, I think that's a good idea, because my grandma used to be a nurse, and she used to work for the government, and sometimes she would work 50 or 60-hour weeks. And what would happen was she would complain that it seemed like she wasn't making enough money, because what would end up happening is, working 50 or 60-hour weeks, you'd be making a lot of money in overtime. And what happened was she was getting put 1 or 2 tax bracket above her average salary, and she would be paying a lot more tax. And what would end up happening is, because of that, her paychecks would seem smaller than they actually were. But that's just the normal tax bracket that she was, making money in. But with Trump's new legislation, it would seem that if she made, let's say, $70,000 instead of $50,000, that she'd be put in the $50,000 tax bracket because she was working overtime for those other $20,000. Now, what do you guys think about this whole situation? Do you think people that work overtime should actually still get taxed more? Do you think it's kind of stupid that Trump is making, new legislation? Like, he's just doing too much. He's president now, and he's just trying to put his authority over people. Or do you think, like, hey, maybe it's a good idea that, like, you know, people that work overtime shouldn't be getting taxed as much for their pay because they're working extra hours per week to provide for their family. I don't know personally, because I have never made enough money to actually be put in a new tax bracket. But let me know in the comments below what you think about the whole situation. And thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Roman, aka Young BizWiz, and have an awesome afternoon. Take care. Peace. Overtime tax. Let's say like
you mean I don't know what overtime pay is.
Yeah, so you get paid a lot more money in overtime, right?
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is if you work too much overtime, you'll get put in a new tax bracket, which means you'll get taxed more money on the overtime. And then it's called overtime tax, and basically you just lose more of your paycheck because you work more hours. And so what ends up happening is that people that work overtime and get paid more money actually kind of start losing money because they get put in a higher tax bracket. That sucks, which is why I'm doing a video on it. Interesting. Well, hey guys, have you ever been the victim of overtime tax?